ahead and get started. Apologize that we're a couple minutes late. It is February 6th, 2024. This is our Board of Education meeting starting at 7 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and indicate who is here.
Clark Nelson.
Karen Winder. Chris Wynn.
Connie Burgess.
Kim Chandler. Julie Jackson.
Todd Hubbard. Rich Nye.
Nicole McDermott. We'd like to welcome everybody who's here. We're going to do some quick introductions. Do we have any PTA representatives here? Please stand up and introduce yourself for everybody else.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm the Olympus Council President.
Thank you. Do we have any GEA representation? It's parent-teacher conference tonight, so we'll excuse them. GAEOP? Any representatives there? GESPA?
Hi, I'm Breezy. I am the president of GESPA. This is Jessica, my vice president.
Thanks for being here, you guys. And middle managers? None there. Granite Education Foundation. And I didn't see any elected representatives. Have I missed anybody? Okay. We'll go ahead and move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. We're going to invite Shauna Jensen, who is the Elementary School Leadership and Improvement Director, to come up and lead us in the pledge.
Please stand for the pledge. Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Okay, and we're going to turn the time over to Ben to introduce our reverends.
And I will in turn invite Principal McDonald to come up and introduce her students. And as she does so, to invite the members of the board and superintendency to come off the stand so that we can watch this performance from down here.
All right, I am excited to welcome our Lion Dance team to the board meeting today. We are a Chinese dual immersion school at Calvin Smith, and this team is under the direction of Mrs. Griffin and Miss Gong, and they do a lot of performing this time of year near Lunar New Year, which is on Saturday. So we go ahead and welcome our team.
parents, we'll have some video posted to our social media channels on that as well, so you can check that out at Granite Schools later.
And I know the parents are on their way out, but we just want to acknowledge, thank you parents for bringing your kids and being here tonight. We appreciate you. Out of here. All right, we're going to move on to our good news minute. And who wants to start? Julie, you want to start? Go for it.
This month, or this, I don't know, sometime recently, I spent a couple of hours with our nutrition services, and it was so fantastic. And I started out by discussing with Dana, who is in charge of 500 employees in nutrition services, which I did not realize it was that big. She was looking at things like how to source local beef, how to find recyclable and compostable, disposable stuff, new ingredients. I went on a tour with Danny, who is the guy who invented the salsa recipe that we use, which should be bottled and sold. It literally was the best salsa I've ever eaten. And I thought they were overselling it, but they did not. It's really good. I talked with Liesel, who does special diets, and she was telling me about each of her individual kids who she makes individual lunches for, as if she knew them and she didn't. And the way that she talked about these kids was really touching to me. The kid who can only have a certain amount of fluid because he has a kidney problem, and the things that she's done in order to figure out how to accommodate him. It was just really beautiful and really touching. And talking with the lunch workers at lunch about how they felt when they worked in schools, and sometimes they felt like they were not connected to the school because people never knew who they were, but how they loved their jobs. I was very surprised to hear them say how much they loved their jobs, and they were very dedicated to the fact that they were feeding kids, and they were very concerned about kids going hungry. And I also just want to say the beautiful thing of watching this woman, who I didn't get her name, wipe down this KitchenAid that she had just made 5,000 brownies in, wiping it down with this ginger attention to detail. And this KitchenAid was as tall as me, and I said, how old is that KitchenAid? And they said, oh, that's 20 years old, and it was sparkling clean. And there were people there making taco meat in a bowl that Kim and I could both fit inside, and same thing, their attention to detail and their care of what they were doing. They were on a mission, and I just was so impressed, and I feel very differently about our nutrition services after visiting there, and really appreciate their effort and what they do. So I hope whoever in the cosmos will give them accolades for the job that they're doing.
Thanks. Kim?
Thank you. I was able to get to some PTA council meetings, community council meetings this past month. Good to hear a lot of the feedback and concerns there. In particular, I wanted to thank all the parents who came to the Granger Network Reconfiguration meeting, gave valuable feedback there, and would like to encourage more parents to please come to the additional meetings that we have coming up this month. I think we appreciate all of that feedback and definitely take it to heart, so hope to see more people there. And then also wanted to mention, I know there are quite a few people actively engaged in the current legislative session. I know I've been out there to comment on bills, and Superintendent and Ben, I know there's a lot of people spending a lot of time out there. There are some good people fighting for some very positive change, and I want to recognize and thank them for their efforts. So That's all.
My good news, Min, is a thank you to our wonderful wellness center. The people were so kind, and what a wonderful thing it is for Granite District to have the wellness center that we can go to, and the people there were very kind. I was grateful to be able to go and get the help I needed. So shout out to the Wellness Center. It's great.
I have two things. Am I okay to go? Okay. So I just want to piggyback a little bit what Kim said about the reconfiguration meeting, open houses with parents. Thank you for those in attendance, but I also want to thank the panel. This is the first time I think we've had a panel there before, and we had parents and a teacher and two principals, and I just wanted to thank Ben for setting that up. That was different than we've done in the past, and I really liked that forum. I hope others like that too, but I thought it was great. And the different perspectives is valuable to hear. I just want to really quickly talk about the CTE open house. That was fantastic. It was, all the high schools were represented. It was amazing to go and see what kind of programs the GTI has for our students. It was impressive, and the teachers over there are so excited to have all these different students from all the different schools come and participate, and what a great pathway for some of our students. I was in the hall and I happened to mention, I wonder how many of these kids go on to actually do what they're learning here, you know, if it keeps their interest. And one of the unified firefighters who teaches the EMT class there heard me and said, I was kind of eavesdropping, but I was one of those students. 12 years ago, I was in this class, and I went on to be a firefighter, and he was just so impressed with the program there. And he said he had below average grades when he first took the CTE class at the GTI, and he said it changed his whole direction. And he was from Cyprus, so I had to give a shout out there, but he had nothing but praise to say that, you know, it was an eye-opener for him to see something different that he probably wouldn't have experienced just in his home high school without others' influence. And so he said there was, in his class, 2 of them went on to be firefighters from that, just taking that course. And he just had nothing but praise. And I was so impressed because he was a little emotional about it, because he said, you know, this changed my life to take a class here that was so not in my homeschool and so different for me. And so I just want to thank all of our CTE, GTI coordinators and from each of the high schools, and for running such an amazing program and looking out for so many students and giving them a pathway that maybe they didn't have before.
I just have 2 quick things. One is visiting Pioneer Elementary in West Valley. I learned of a donation from a family who had gathered collections, and they reached out to Pioneer Elementary and said, you know what, we would love to help pay off some school lunch fees. And so they did a donation of a few $1,000s. And I was going to talk about that last month, but we ran out of time. But I thought it was still noteworthy for community members to be watching out for each other. And this particular family had attended Pioneer in the past, and so they are loyal to that school and still wanted to do good for the school. So my other last quick thing is met with a Hunter Elementary principal. She was new to the school mid-year. Mid-year transfers for principals are always a challenge. And had a great visit with her out at Hunter Elementary, and she's got some good goals and some good ideas for that community. So I was really happy to spend a minute with her.
I recently had the chance to attend the Chinese New Year celebration in the Cottonwood Network. Most impressive about it were 2 things. One is it was truly a network event where there were teachers and principals from Cottonwood High School, from Bonneville Junior, and Oakwood Elementary, where the dual immersion program is housed in each of those 3 schools. And so it's great to see the collaboration and the coordination between those schools to put on a great event. The second part of that event was that I competed against Principal Eric Bailey in the chopstick jelly bean pickup contest, and I did win. Secondly, I want to say thanks to the Bantam coaches in the Cottonwood Network Bantam basketball program. These are people that volunteer their time to coach, and not just coach, but mentor our youth in some sport. This sport happens to be basketball, but they spend a tremendous amount of time to do so, and there's several board members of that Bantam organization who spend a tremendous amount of time to help those kids compete and play sports in an environment where they get to represent their future high school and wear the Cottonwood name on their jersey while they play. And it culminated in a Bantam night, or a couple of Bantam nights, because there are so many kids at both a boys and a girls basketball game last week. And it was great to see both the players and their coaches out supporting their neighborhood high school and supporting each other in their efforts to be great community members. Thanks.
Thanks, Clark. My Good News Minute is similar to Clark's. I got the opportunity to participate in the Chinese New Year celebration at Taylorsville in the Taylorsville Network. And if you can imagine what happened here tonight times at least 2, they had the junior high as well participating. It was nice to see the Key Club from Taylorsville come over and help out. A lot of high school kids came and helped and really made it a community event, and really is a fun. I saw the pictures from the Cottonwood one, and I love seeing that, and that they're starting to do that as well. I think it's such a great thing to have that community event happen. And also I just wanted to give a shout out as well for the GTI open house. I know several of us went. I took my son, and he was super, super excited about the engineering part. He's going to take that next year, but I just wanted to say thank you to those teachers. There was a student there who talked to him, and he was a 9th grade student, and my son's going into 9th grade, and he just was like, this is the best. This is the best place. This is the best class. So I appreciate those students also having that enthusiasm and being there to help us out. So thank you. That's our Good News Minute, and we're going to move on to, I don't see any elected officials, so unless I am missing anybody, we're going to go ahead and move on to patron participation time. We do have one person who signed up, Shannon Garner, sorry. We're going to invite you up, and please make sure you state your name for the record just so we have it, and you have about 3 minutes to go ahead and let us know what you have. Thanks.
My name is Shannon Garner. Is that all you need is my name? Okay. All right. Superintendent and I and board. First of all, thank you for the time you continue to put in talking with teachers, parents, and even students as you go out to the schools you represent. I am a parent and educator in the Granite School District. I have had the opportunity to see our special class students as they have started in preschool, transitioned and started in kindergarten, to now where I am at in a high school applied academics setting at Taylorsville High School. I am also a mother of a student who needs support in the classroom through accommodations. Without the help of the social worker and his teacher, my son would struggle more than he has. With that said, as you move forward with the kindergarten redesign for special education students, I hope you will consider the following. Psychologists and social workers are calculated based on enrollment, not by amount of 504 or special education students, thus leaving students without the full amount of support that they may need. It has been suggested by a few psychologists that psychologists and social workers are assigned based on the amount of students for 504 and special education versus enrollment. Each school has a different level of need. Please consider this as you are looking at funding. As you know, and as it was stated at the board study session, it always creates more for special education. This is true. Special education does require more. Students who are not typical developing need more support. Are we able to provide that support with this new design? With that said, there is already a large amount of support that is needed in our resource settings, still with unfilled para positions. I appreciated the deep conversation and questions that guided your study session. If this is indeed the direction you as a board are going, the considerations need to be seriously taken. I was able to sit on the stakeholder feedback group. There are teachers concerned, psychologists concerned, related service providers and admin concerned. At your study session, it was said that the details haven't been nailed down yet. Approval of budgets is being looked at. This is exactly what the board should be looking at first before a decision moving forward. Thank you for doing this. For our psychologists, related service providers, paraprofessionals, teachers, and especially our parents and the kindergartners they are about to send to school next year. Dr. Nye, thank you. Thank you for saying we need to take action for students with disabilities. As you said, some of this depends on what happens during the legislative session. Please provide a budget that will support our students, teachers, related service providers, and principals. Our kids deserve the best education with their typical peers and with the support they need. Thank you for your time and service you provide for our communities.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you for what you do at Taylorsville. All right, we're going to move on to our consent agenda. We've had this for a few days to be able to look over it. I will go ahead and entertain a motion.
I motion that we approve the consent agenda. I'm sorry, I move that we approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion or questions? Comments? All right, a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. We're going to go ahead and move to our first action item, which is administrative appointments. If there's any questions, or I will entertain a motion for that as well. Do we just? Are we doing action? Oh.
We haven't done this before.
I know.
I move that we accept as an action item the administrative appointments. Does that sound right?
These are separate.
Is there, can somebody speak to why
Yeah.
we're voting on this second? Because in years past, it's just been part of consent.
I asked for it to be removed and put as a separate action item so that we don't overlook it or think that we're trying to have it be just passed under the radar. That way we have also the opportunity to do it right as we do that, to introduce the new people. So it should go fast.
Okay. Did you move?
I did.
I second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. With that, we're going to turn the time over to John first, and then Noel after that.
Board of Education and members of our executive leadership team, it's my honor this evening to introduce our new elementary school leadership and improvement director. As you know, probably by now, one of my directors, Tina West, is retiring at the end of the year. And so you just approved an appointment that will start July 1st for this upcoming school year. I'd like to introduce you to, you already know her, but Lynn Rada. So Lynn, if you could stand. Lynn actually started her career here in Granite as a teacher. She taught at Eastwood, Meadowmore, I know that's a blast from the past, and Driggs Elementary School. She was taught 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 6th grade. Different times, of course, in each of those schools. And then she moved into administration. She was an assistant principal at Whittier and Vista Elementaries. And then she served as the principal at Benyon Elementary School, and she also served as the principal of Morningside Elementary School before she became the director of teaching and onboarding and instructional coaching, which is the current position she's serving in Granite. So congratulations, Lynn. I would let her take some time and introduce those that she has with her family, but her family couldn't be here tonight, but she has kind of an adopted family. They're sitting back here, several of the directors that she'll be working with, so she doesn't want to have to introduce them, though, but they're here to support her as well. Thank you, Lynn.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you, Board President and board members, and all of us here in the audience. I also have a new position to announce. Becky Monson, who's my current Associate Director over literacy, is also retiring, and we will miss her greatly, but we are honored to be able to introduce Amber Clayton. So Amber, if you'll stand. And I'll just tell you a little bit about Amber. She actually spent her 10 years of teaching experience in Washington State before moving into the state of Utah. And she spent some time as the UniServe manager, the Director of Teaching and Learning for the Utah Education Association, then moving into Davis School District and Salt Lake District as an administrator, and then finally landing with us, which was the right call for her, and certainly the right call for us. She spent time with a diverse experience here in Granite at Granger Elementary, Mill Creek, and then most currently at Woodstock Elementary. I do want to just explain or boast one thing about Amber, and that is that she won 5 awards in the year of 2023. She boasted the Community Leader for Augusta, Gassa Elementary Principal of the Year, Region 5 Elementary Principal of the Year, Utah PTA Outstanding Elementary Principal, and the Excel Award winner for 2023. So we are very excited to have Amber. And so Amber, I think you brought with you your husband?
This is my better half, Jim Clayton.
Jim Clayton. So please welcome Amber to the Curriculum and Instruction Department.
Thank you. We're thrilled to have you both in your newly appointed positions. We did also have some other appointments that are open contracts. We will announce them and their particular assignments when they are assigned later on in the year. All right. Thank you for being here, you guys. We're going to move on to our calendar. We're going to turn the time over to Ben Horsley, Shauna Jensen, and Craig Stauffer for this.
Good evening, board and executive leadership team. Happy to be here tonight for the survey results for the 25-26 calendar.
It's not working. There it goes.
All right. The survey closed just at the end of January, and the first slide here is the relationship of people that were taking the survey. We had record amount take it this year. We had over 10,000 responses. We had 11% students, 58% parents, 23% employees, and 8% making up parents and employees. Networks giving input. This shows all of our networks, and then we have, of course, some people that don't associate with a network, whether they work here at the district or aren't sure what high school network they belong to. But you can see that we had multiple responses from every network. This year we asked a different question, as you'll remember from the last time we talked about this. The question on the survey was to ask if people liked the end of first or second term, first semester to be before the Christmas break. And you can see that almost 71% did like having the semester end before we went off for winter break. And then we also wanted to reiterate that question and make sure that everyone understood. If you want the semester to end before Christmas break, then we do need to start a little bit earlier in August. And we had 67% say that they were fine with starting earlier in August. 32% didn't want to start earlier in August. And then we had 4,200 that skipped that question.
With our calendar options, we're sharing with you the results of the choices between calendar A and B. You can see that this is quite a big spread as compared to years previously as far as the calendar that they chose. You can also see that both employees and students had the largest percentage difference, being 74% with employees, and students choosing calendar B, 73%. But it was a majority in all 4 areas.
I've never seen a spread like this. We've never reached the 60% threshold on any calendar in modern era.
Yes. That is also true as far as the majority of the networks. The only network that had a preference with calendar A looks like to be the Olympus network. And again, it was very close when it comes down to actual percentages, but the remainder were in favor of option B. And then just to remind you of the 2 calendars and the differences, calendar A, teachers return on the 13th and school begins on the 20th and then ends June 5th, where calendar B option, students or teachers return a week earlier on the 6th, school begins a week earlier on the 13th, but then it ends a week earlier as well in May on the 29th. Fall break are just a week apart. It shows you again that winter break versus first semester ending after on option A or ending before on option B. Spring break is either the first week of including in April or the second week in April. And then the days are a little bit different, of course. Looking at option A, they're very close. Option B, there's a difference between 7 days with semesters. This is just a depiction of those 2 along with the percentage votes. So 62.77 for B, 37.23 for A. And then this last piece, Ben was going to.
Yeah, we've had some good discussions in this meeting in the study session. So we just re-present this question with respect to how the board would like us to proceed in terms of our current protocol and procedure, which is to survey our communities on their preference in the fall, like we've typically done. There was some discussion about possibly moving that survey up to the springtime or tying it to this particular survey that we've just conducted, and or continue to, or change up the process altogether and survey the community on whether they prefer to have a standard calendar platform. First week of April is spring break, et cetera, things kind of locked in, and so that we no longer solicit that community input and we just kind of have a baseline calendar that's the same each and every year, or continue with the same process. So we wanted to open it up to that conversation too and receive any direction the board might have. As a reminder, we did take that option back to the calendaring committee and they preferred to continue with the option that we have right now, which is to continue to gather input on an annual basis and make calendars based on the preferences described there.
So does anybody feel strongly about that we'd like to direct them to include that question on the next, in the fall? Julie, you're the one that felt the most strong.
Yeah, I do feel like we could ask that question. And another thing that came out of this for me when I was talking to my community is this, I continue to have people say to me, we don't really ever have an option to vote on a calendar where we start the 3rd or 4th week of August and get out the 2nd week of June or something like that. And so how do you know that the majority of people don't actually want that? And saying things like, well, I did vote for calendar B because I thought, what's the difference in a week and if it gets out early? But I would have voted for one later if it was actually later, but it was only a week later. And so I think that's something that I would love the board to, the calendaring committee to consider as well is we have a pretty good sense here of which calendar everyone prefers. I don't know that means that we know that it is the calendar they prefer. It means it was the 1 out of 2 that they prefer, right? That's what we are learning here. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily what our community actually prefers. So I don't really have that's more of a comment than it is direction. I don't have a strategy or direction for you on that. I would like, personally, to know if our community would like a consistent calendar every year. I don't necessarily want to say, yes, let's have a consistent calendar. I want to say, I want to know if our community cares about that.
Karen, you had a comment?
You can go ahead, Kim.
Mine's very quick. I also would like to at least ask the question of the community.
I just plain devil's advocate here. So to me, if we ask them the question and it comes back, yeah, we want a set calendar, then we have to realize as a board, what does that mean? Then we are going to have a set calendar, and then all this other parent feedback from our current system goes away because we're not even surveying them. So I'm just saying, and to be clear, I'm saying what I'm saying because I like the community feedback. I like parents being able to chime in, employees being able to chime in every year. You know what, let me take a look at this. Let me look and see what works best for me, for my job, for my family, for my community. And so I'm struggling with this, because if we ask that question and it's overwhelmingly, yeah, just set a calendar, then I hope people realize, and maybe we need to outline this in the question, is by choosing this, you do lose the opportunity to vote on calendar options in the future. So I'm a little torn, but if we were to go down that path, and other board members, you can chime in, we need to attach to this what it means if they support this. It's kind of similar to what I was asking on the survey calendar. If you ask the question, do we want to be out by middle, if we want first semester to end, then we've got to ask the question, are you okay starting early, right? So we've just got to make sure that if we go forward with this, my request would be to quantify that. What does that, saying yes to that question, what are the unintended consequences that come out of it? Because if you're saying, yes, I want a detailed calendar, you're also saying, I don't want to vote. I don't want to have a voice in calendar options. It's just going to be made for me. It's going to be top down. Here you go. You have no say. So I'm not saying there's not pros to knowing the set calendar, but I want our community, who, by the way, is very used to having a voice on the calendar options, that if you take that away from our employees, I'm seeing some of the teachers nodding, if all of a sudden we take that voice away from parents, parent employees, students, and teachers, I think it might have, I think we might hear a few complaints on that too. So those are kind of some of my thoughts.
Can I respond to that? What I'm hearing from my community is that they do not feel that the survey does give them a voice, because it's two options and neither of them represents what they want anyway. So they don't, so they feel like they aren't having a voice in the survey anyway. And the other thing I was going to say is that in talking with our surrounding districts who do this, they say that the calendar is never a problem or an issue. Nobody ever brings it up as a big deal. Whereas, at least for me, I would say this is like the number one thing that my community talks to me about, but they're saying, no, nobody ever talks to me about the calendar. And there's something great about that they're talking to me about this and they know that they can have impact on that, right? But it also says there's peace, there's rhythm. People seem to be okay and seem to like being able to count on it every year.
And that may apply to your community. I'm hearing opposite.
Well, that's why I want to ask the question.
Yeah.
That's why I think the question should be asked. And again, while I'm saying people love the rhythm of it or whatever, I'm not arguing for it. I'm arguing for asking the question.
Right. And I understand that. It's tricky too, because like I said, I'm not against gathering that feedback. We have to realize though that we would be changing course, and I think people naturally would feel like that voice is being taken away. I would also say, I understand where maybe their calendar isn't the favorite calendar. Option wise, I do think we can look at the calendar with a big spread that we have 67% on calendar B, is that we can see what I take from that is if your community was really for starting late, and then they would be all in on calendar A. but it was very close. It was 48-52 in Olympus. So I'm not entirely sure that they don't feel like they have any say, because they had a chance to voice at least that starting late was their preferred thing, but it barely, you know what I mean? So I would say I don't know that I agree that they don't feel like they have any voice. It's your community. I can't speak for it.
So do you support the idea of asking the question if we ask it correctly? Is that what you're saying?
I'd be curious to hear other board members. As long as we quantified it to what it really meant, then I'd be okay.
So this is the first calendar I've seen with such a huge spread. Because normally it's so close sometimes that I never felt like I was actually representing my community when I voted anyway, because it was so close. This is the first time I'm like, oh, this is exactly what they want, because it's such a big spread. So I feel like we're heading towards where we're maybe finding calendars that actually are, if it's continuing to be lopsided like this, then are we really, do they need a choice if we're going to have such a spread every time? Because then there's always going to be people that feel like their voice isn't being heard because the majority is winning every time. So I don't know, where sometimes it's so close. I feel like this is the first time it's spread enough that maybe that's a great question to ask, is did we find a calendar that actually fits the needs of our teachers and our parents and our communities? So I would be for this question on the next survey with, like Karen said, the repercussion. Like if we go with a calendar like this is what we would start, and end and blah, blah, blah. So,
yeah. And as a comment.
Actually, I just want to respond what I perceive to be questions. So, and again, we have no opinion over here. We're on a 243-day contract either way. So we're just here to help facilitate that process, and we're happy to do whatever the board would incline in that direction. But I do want to propose, if we carry on through that, we do ask the question, my fear is this, Julie, and with respect to your community and given this current result on this particular calendar, the rule of surveys and in the scientific communities, don't ask a question you don't want the answer to, right? And so with respect to that, if we do survey and the go-ahead is given to implement a structured calendar and it becomes calendar B moving forward, that takes away the voice of your community members altogether moving forward if we're going to start early in August and by Memorial Day.
I was just about to say that. If we surveyed my community, do you want the calendar to look the same every year? They'd say, are you talking about this calendar? Or are you talking about a different calendar? Because if it's this calendar, they're going to say, no, I don't want it the same every year.
Go ahead, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm just saying, so it is really interesting. What is the question? And I also just want to say, while I'm voicing this and I feel the need to advocate, I also really feel conflicted in advocating because I really do respect what the calendaring committee recommends. And that is weighing heavy on me that I'm continuing to advocate for it, because I think that that committee knows what they're talking about. So it's hard for me to disagree with you.
Can I just, a text just came in and it said from these surrounding districts that their community members and their employees feel very frustrated at the lack of their voice. So I did not know that, and I just received a text.
There are 45 people watching online, so just bring that down. I monitor that closely.
And that is a good reminder. You cannot make sweeping statements about how people feel in any district, right?
To respond to another question that I think was presented, I just want to double check what I'm hearing because, again, going back to the notion is we don't want to ask questions we don't want the answer to. Is this board prepared to accept a calendar that would go into mid to late June and start after Labor Day? That would be...
That's what the community
No.
If my community wanted it, I would.
If it was overwhelming like this one, where it was like, yeah, that's preferred.
When I got on this board, if you asked me, would I be willing to start the first week of August, I would have said absolutely not. But here my community is telling me that they want it. So I'm going to vote for it, even though I personally do not want it.
I think if you start after Labor Day, you're going into the third week of June. So people would really have to look at that. because of all the holidays.
Either that or we have a 2-week fall break.
So
Or
that's
spring.
why I'm saying no, is I'm like, I don't think people would really be willing to go into the 3rd week of June.
Clark, you had a comment?
Call the question.
There's not a motion to
There's not
call
a
the
motion.
question.
We do need to, we would request that the board act on the information as presented. It is a 2-reading process to adopt a calendar. This is an action item, and we do need to have the board take action on one of these calendars.
So,
Can I throw a last comment out
Go
before
for it.
we move? I feel like asking the question is giving people a voice. So I'm hearing the argument it's going to take voices away, but the point of the question is, do you guys want community? Do you want to consistent, like that's a voice they should have as well. They should be able to voice that opinion.
And I'm not countering that. What I'm saying is if they come back with a positive answer, they're not going to have a future voice on any calendar. So to quantify and clarify my question on not having a voice is they would have a voice to that question, but if we give the calendaring committee the direction of just a set calendar and it's very templated, then they wouldn't have a voice to choose between calendars of the future. That's what I mean.
I move we accept calendar B for the 2025-2026 school year.
I'll second.
okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any further comments, questions? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I am opposed.
Okay.
And I'll just state, I want to vote for those who didn't want it, because I don't think it's the best.
All right, thank you.
Can I just get some clarification for the 3 of us up here in terms of summary of what we've heard here, just so we're clear on?
I'm about to move for that conversation.
So it's not listed as an agenda item, so we can't have an official vote on it. It sounds like, though, we have enough people up here who are interested in having that question be on the survey. So with the parameters, as Karen said, with the parameters of you need to realize what you're giving up if we do move towards that. I think the way that this question was framed here, that second one, in order for the second term to end before winter break, you must start earlier in August. Having that be you have to answer that one first. You understand this, and you still prefer that. Just having that framed that way.
I wonder if we could frame it with a time period on it. We would do it for 3 years, and then we'd readdress it as a board and decide if we wanted to go back to our former system.
I don't think that needs to be stated in the survey personally, but
Okay.
I mean, the board is always open to be able to do whatever they want.
I like the flexibility.
I like that there was I think it was a student who commented that said they want to start after Labor Day and get out before Memorial Day. I want to see that calendar.
We all do. With respect to that, I think we have sufficient information to craft some questions, so thank you for that.
All right, thank you. Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. The next item on our agenda is the sex education materials. However, we are without any objection. We're going to skip over that one as there was an oversight in sending those materials out. So we are going to move that to the agenda for March. With that, we're going to turn the time over to Rich from Board Handbook.
Thanks, Board President. The board's had an opportunity to review the board handbook, and there's just a few last changes. First and foremost, the mission and vision of the district are now incorporated in the handbook, as well as some board meeting procedures that we received some feedback on regarding our parliamentary procedures and the structure of those. And that was largely found on page 12. And so as far as the board's feedback that we've received as staff, we've made those changes and just put it forward to your consideration as your board handbook.
We did review this in law and policy as well, and just talked about some of those changes. So if there's any questions with that, if not, I'll entertain a motion.
I move we approve the board handbook.
I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second to approve the board handbook. Is there any questions or comments? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes. All right, we are going to move on to the Population Analysis Committee study and turn the time over to Steve and Ben. Ben's going to do this too, right?
I have officially jinxed the main presentation computer. Anytime I get near it, it has a glitch. I apologize.
It used to be me. I've passed that baton off to Dawn.
It's my year. Even in odd years.
May I comment, Board President, before, as they're getting their thing together?
Personal privilege, go ahead.
One of the things that we discussed in the board book that we just approved, the board handbook, is that parliamentary procedure actually indicates that we would have an issue, we'd make a motion, and then there would be discussion. And our habit has been to discuss until there's a motion made. And so I just wanted to point that out because that's a behavior that our board would want to start kind of trying to work to change that habit to be in line with the procedure in our handbook.
Just to be clear, it is okay to ask questions, and that's the clarifying questions at that time are appropriate, but then the discussion should happen after the motion.
Makes it easier to call the question that way.
Then we can call it.
You have to make the motion first, Clerk.
That's what made us think of it, Clark.
It's almost there. It's coming up, if you're ready. So, Board President, Board, and others watching with us tonight, I know that for most people, last week was Groundhog Day. But for me, and perhaps for you, I think we just did this yesterday, right? And I feel like today probably feels more like Groundhog Day for me. So I'm glad to be back in all seriousness. So we'll go through the agenda quickly. Just a review of 3 options that the PAC has come up with this year and a recommendation for the 2024 study, as well as discussion, of course, and questions, and perhaps a recommendation or board approval for this year's study. I included this as simply a brief recap and reminder and context of where we've been recently and where we're at in tonight's discussion. Remember, of course, we've a few years ago, with the help of Davis Demographics, divided or put the district into some study areas. And in area 4 that we studied a couple of years, or a little more than a year ago, and we had 3 schools closed from that area. Last calendar year, we studied areas 1 and 2, and that means we have areas 3 and 5 remaining. So again, for those not familiar, and that's a brief catch up on where we're at geographically in the study. I will say, in the spirit of full disclosure and even transparency, and even because the PAC has asked me they always want to make sure that I'm conveying their concerns, their ideas, and their feelings on these subjects. And I'll just simply say that in my 10 years of doing this is perhaps one of the most challenging times we've had in the last couple of months to come up with a strong consensus on a recommendation. We do have a recommendation, of course, and most of the time, most years, we have either an extremely strong consensus, if not unanimous consent on these. This year was a little different. And that's partly why we have 3 options to consider. And I think you can perhaps see why as we go through these, and I'll just go through these quickly, but I wanted to convey that and help you understand that we in fact had to, in the end, I had them vote and rank these options. Each option did receive considerable consideration and even some number 1 rankings as we went, but I just want you to understand this year was a little bit more difficult. No, I'll say a lot more difficult than in years past. So with that, let's jump into option 1 and what that looks like and some things we considered there and are still considering. 1-year internal study. Some of those considerations that have come up, and of course there are others, but I think we've boiled them down to these. to evaluate the efficacy and impact of DLI programs, especially in low enrollment schools. To look at new state, there's currently some proposed legislation. So consider new state legislation, which typically going into effect in May of the same year, that could impact how studies are conducted. Ben, I don't know if you want to add that, or we can go to it if you want to.
Just real quick, two current bills that we're aware of. Senator Grover's bill was introduced during the interim, and a revision to that has not come out. It would be a major change to our process. So it remains to be seen. I did have time to discuss that with him this last summer and kind of walk through our process and what's working, and hopefully try to convince him that major changes are not needed and necessary. And then Representative Brady Brammer's bill, which JLC voted to support, it does two things that we have questions or concerns about. The sponsor was able to clarify that in the motion process, you first worked through your process to close schools through a 90-day period, and then open it up for a 60-day period to revise the boundaries after you've closed those schools. And it was suggested that we could do those, continue to do those simultaneously, and we wouldn't have to break those up into two processes. So I'm going to take the sponsor at his word on that. It then would require the board, if you remember the 2023 study where we actually closed 3 schools in one motion, but we were actually evaluating up to 9 different options. You guys remember that? We would have to go back and close, not go back, but in the course of a similar study, we would have to vote on each of those closures independently, each and every one, instead of doing that collectively as one option out of 9 like we did previous. So that would be the concern and question there. I expect that bill to pass.
So again, because the PAC has been aware of this, we at least wanted to make sure that was a consideration as we went forward, and we wanted to make sure the board was aware of those. Potential new Davis demographic study to consider the latest data and trends. Just a reminder, we of course used Davis demographics to help us about 4 years ago, and that study is, the data is good for 1 more school year beyond this year, so through next year. And the data has been what we would consider very accurate for us the last 4 years, and we do have it for 1 more year. However, we believe it will be advantageous to us to consider extending that out to double check our data based on things that have changed in the last even couple of years. Next, SPED expansion or placement of services at the elementary and secondary levels are still unfolding. Some of those changes have already taken place. Some of those potential changes are under discussion, and some of those have an impact on our schools and spaces and transportation issues. To finalize reconfiguration decisions and let the dust settle on recent changes and growth. I know, of course, that potential decision is coming up on reconfiguration. The impacts on schools and their FTE without ESSER funding. I, of course, do projections for the district, enrollment projections, and as I've been talking to principals the last few weeks in preparation for giving those projections to HR, it's a strong consideration. How is that going to impact our schools? We've been fortunate to have those funds, and we will not have those funds starting next year.
I think the key part of this that PAC wanted to take into consideration was the fact that many of our small schools are being subsidized through ESSER funding. They don't know and understand the problems and the challenges and difficulties that we've discussed and has been part of our conversation, because they've been frankly helped by this funding. And not that we want those schools to feel the pain, but with the loss of this funding, invariably there's going to be some pain felt throughout the district regardless of whatever changes we make.
And lastly, closure fatigue is real. We've heard that for several months, not just from the PAC, but others. We've closed 7 schools as a district in the last 5 years, dozens of other schools, and with boundary changes and feeder changes. And the question came up, are we sharpening the saw often enough? And so it's a legitimate question, and one that's been talked about within PAC, and I know even outside of PAC, for several months. And so it was one that I promised to include on here. The PAC also, along with that, wanted everyone to know that They are not just duty-bound, but want to do what's necessary and right for all students and what is good for the district, but especially the students. And so they were trying to balance those two needs, but I wanted to make sure it was something considered. So that in essence is option one. That was the PAC ran through.
Could I just make mention on bullet 3 too, the discussion was had that our data is really only in relation to elementary schools, and we're going to start to see the impacts of some of these population declines on our secondary schools too. So perhaps if we were to collect additional data from an independent demographer, that we'd look at what those impacts were in the short term, the next 5 years on those secondary schools as well.
Thank you. So option 2, study area 5, or what most people typically just refer to as the east side of the district. Remember, again, a couple of years ago, we were in area 4, and we mentioned, just like I say in the first bullet point, study in area 5 in 2024 was openly discussed and even anticipated since the 2022 study. I know Ben and I mentioned it, and that has been the plan, quite frankly. And it was mentioned that, hey, we would kind of go east side, west side, if you will, east side, west side, and trying to balance those competing interests out. But so we acknowledge and own that. That has absolutely kind of been the anticipated plan, if you will. 3 schools in this area, in area 5, are at or below 300 students. So there are concerns there. We know that, and again, acknowledge those. We do have relatively minimum residential growth projected in this area, and the areas close to it. And quite frankly, that's mostly Mill Creek City, where we continue to see more of our high-density building, which gives us very, very little student yield or new students from those areas. Things can change, and they do change, but that's the data as it currently stands. And I actually put a space here between this last one, just as a reminder, because this has come up in the community and in the PAC, was just more by way of reminder that an elementary rebuild in this area is still approximately 10 years out. I do know, and Don, you can correct me if I get this part wrong, but in the original bond plan from 2017, when the first phase came out, I believe Eastwood was on the rebuild for 2026 and Oak Ridge for 2028. There's obviously a lot of things have been pushed back, but just as a reminder, it really didn't sway things one way or the other than to restate that we're probably approximately 10 years out from rebuilds in this area. Okay, next one. Option 3, not area 3, by the way, but option 3, the 3500 South corridor, as the PAC began to call it. You can see, of course, the area outlined in green on the far west with Wright and Orchard. Along that 3500 South, some even, again, full disclosure, we really started on a 3100 South corridor because that was the heart of the area we had been looking at. But to make sure that we're really covering our bases and considering the potential domino effects that we always see. And it's something most everyone knows is 3500 South, but 3500 South corridor. So on the west, bounded by Wright and Orchard, and as far east along that corridor as Wilson and Olene Walker. And I can come back to that in just a moment. So some of the considerations there. The PAC believes this area has the most urgent need due to the number of highly impacted schools in this area. Many schools along this corridor are struggling to maintain effective traditional classes in conjunction with DLI because their total enrollment is frankly too small. I want to jump just as one sample to the Valley Crest slide. This is Valley Crest's most up-to-date data. You can just see highlighted in yellow, teachers in DLI. Now again, every school along this corridor is slightly different, but this one is the one I wanted to highlight. We hear about it a lot, but they have 2 DLI and 1 traditional class. Mostly, I think in 4th grade and 6th grade, they're down to 1 and 1. Other schools are similar. We have some schools that are running 1 DLI per grade, And in some grades and 2 in other grades, they're just struggling to trying to balance these programs out. And along that corridor, especially along Monroe, Valley Crest, Hillsdale, Stansbury, even Granger and some others, it's just becoming more and more problematic. Next, a new charter school opens near this area in the fall of 2025. That school is just slightly out of this area, or the green box, if you will, but it will have an impact throughout the area. That's the new Wallace Stegner Academy, just south of Hunter High School, which is scheduled to open in 2025 as a K-9 school, and each year after that, for 3 years, add 1 new grade, with eventually being a K-12 school. And finally, again, the mention of reconfiguration in 2025 in the 6th grade to junior high, to make sure we're keeping that in mind as we go. Let's just jump to the, sorry, go back. There we go, the recommendation. There we go, sorry, that was it. That's it.
Now is the time for questions.
So I will say, if I just briefly, this is a different slide slightly, because this option 3 is currently the PAC's recommendation. Like I said, we did have to rank vote these, and some of these same things, but worded just a little differently. So again, the PAC believes this area has the most urgent need due to the number of highly impacted schools, combined with the many schools along the corridor that are struggling to maintain effective traditional classes in DLI. Also, again, the new charter school opens in the area. The PAC would like to study potential adjustments that might offset any impact of that school opening before it opens. Reconfiguration, as mentioned, and we may also, I wanted to add this, we could also, in conjunction with this, reach out to a demographer and ask for an update in conjunction with this study. We don't necessarily have to do that on a so-called off year or an internal study year. It can be done. We just have to get that data as soon as possible and be able to use that. So given those 3 options, that is currently the PAC's recommendation, but of course we want to get your recommendation. And I will, you see the one slide on anticipated future studies. If you had asked tonight, that we would suggest that Area 5, if it went according to this plan, Area 5 would be back up for study next year. Area 3, or what's remaining of that area, in the following year in 2026. And then finally, perhaps some high school network studies after that.
Obviously, just reminding this body and the general public, we paused a high school network study in the 2023 school year, that study year, and we'd actually like to kind of get some up-to-date data as part of any independent demographer, so that we could reopen that and expand it to some of our other West Side high schools as well.
So with that, I'll just open it for discussion or other questions.
So I have a question on option 3, because according to the map, you're going almost to 4,100. So are you going to stay with 35 and 3,100 South, those schools, or are you going to go over and hit the?
I think that's why we use the word corridor in this one, because no, 3,500 is not a hard boundary for the study.
That's what I'm wondering.
But we're talking.
So would you include all of those schools that are within that?
Yeah, and even some of those schools, even Wright and Orchard, for instance, I talked to those principals earlier today, give them a heads up that, hey, yeah, you were part of a study last year, and you could potentially be part of a study this year. So they understood that. But yes, it's an approximation so far. I think I would answer that just the way we like to answer everything at the beginning of studies is, I would say everything's on the table in the beginning. Let's narrow the focus as soon as we can. And that was our way to do that, is to call it the corridor. And as soon as we can, we will narrow the focus to specific schools and boundaries and areas.
It's basically 3,100 to 4,100 is kind of your north-south That's what's outlined there, yeah.
Clark had a question first.
I have a question. I'm on record that I much prefer a more comprehensive approach. So I appreciate the fact that this green circle that you've drawn spreads across multiple of these previously identified areas, 1 through 4 at least. That said, one of the issues that you've presented that's at play here are DLI, or dual language immersion program related. While that's a consideration, I also think there are some distinct and unique issues that are created because of those dual language immersion programs. So I'm going to bring into the mix that it doesn't seem like there's going to be legislation this year that impacts dual language immersion, but that seems to be on the horizon, that there's that possibility that that funding could be eliminated at the state level. So I'm curious how that comes to bear in this option, as well as, from a legislative standpoint, but also from a fact I think we learned some things in the recent boundary studies that this dual language immersion program is a very unique situation. So I'll let you speak. I think I've...
So I'm going to look at 2 people here. I got Todd, who came back with budget recommendations today that indicated that the DLA funding will be preserved at least for 1 additional year. Feel free to chime in if you want to add to that.
So from the Public Education Committee, the motion was to restore the funding because it's not in the base budget bill right now. So that funding would be restored and be subject to further study into the interim. So they'll look at it this summer.
Is there any insights, and I realize we're kind of trying to read the tea leaves here from a legislative standpoint, but is there any insight into what a wind down would look like if the legislature were to pull that from the base budget next year?
Not that I'm aware of. No phase out.
No phase out, no wind down. It's just the funding is gone. So
could you remind us, Todd, what that amount looks like, the impact would be to Granite School District?
So for Granite School District, I think it's about $1.7 million is what we receive in state funding.
And I thought that at some point, I thought it was you who told me it was minimal. It was like $8 per student or something like that. That doesn't sound like $8 per student. That sounds like a lot more money than that.
I'm not sure what the dollar is on
Yeah.
a per student basis.
So that would be a significant hit if they took that.
Yes, depending on the direction they go. And so there's been, during this legislative session, a few different scenarios, if you will, that they would do with this funding and other programmatic funding. And depending on the scenario, then determines what the fiscal impact would be to our district. And so I would say, I think it's fair to say two things. One, if the legislature did do something in this regard, it would be less, if not altogether reduced or gone. To the second point, and our primary concern, and something that we would recommend coming back to the board in maybe a March study session, is talking about DLI, which addresses the second issue and prevailing issue, is we have under-enrolled schools and programs in that area as it currently exists. Again, regardless of whether or not we get reduced funding from the legislature in that space. So there is opportunity to address both of those issues.
I'm sorry, just point of clarification, do we anticipate that discussion in the February or the March? I thought it was February, but you just said March, so.
I'm just hoping for spring, an early spring. No, I think we'll turn to board leadership on that. I believe we floated both ideas, but it may be as early as February study session.
Sure. So we expected to have some additional conversations surrounding that, and Rick has been tasked to put some items together with respect to that as well.
So it's a valid point, Clark, sorry, because again, that was part of our conversation again in PAC, and why, again, I'm saying that this has been a tough year to try to figure out things.
Yeah, so my concern in that regard is while I recognize the urgency of perhaps analyzing that corridor, and I'm not a fan of punting challenges down the road, is there some benefit to waiting on the 3500 South corridor because we don't know what DLI might look like a year from now versus the Area 5 East Side schools don't fit that, they don't have that same challenge. So there's a little bit, for lack of a better term, it might be a little bit cleaner of a study in that regard versus a lot of unknowns that still have to play out with respect to 3 different DLI schools in that corridor.
Don really wants to respond to that question as well, but I was going to point out as well, there's a couple other considerations with respect to this corridor, in addition to the DLI, the struggling DLI programs, which was the pronounced concern in PAC. I would say the preeminent concern. If you look at this area on this map, there's also a couple of other considerations that we added as part of the study. In relation to Redwood Elementary, we have some concerns there that we'd like to address that are somewhat urgent. We also have the addition of a family shelter that's coming into the 3300 and I-15 that we need to address that could potentially add an impactful amount of students into our area, and that will have some long-term impacts on Granite School District. So that was part of the consideration of PAC. Did I miss anything, Don?
No, great summaries. I think the PAC really felt compelled. We could, you can call it fires, right? We have maybe a smaller fire burning up in Area 5, but we have a pretty significant fire burning in the 3500 South corridor, and we feel compelled that in the best interest of the student, so they continue to get the best possible education, that addressing these concerns along 3500 really seemed to be the preeminent motivator to bring this recommendation forward. Feeling that, like you say, while it might look cleaner, if DLI funding goes away, the situation in the corridor only gets worse. So we're not looking at this option 3 recommendation getting any better. So we'd like to tackle it as soon as possible so we don't have students experiencing 1, 2, or even 3 years worth of educational lag because we didn't focus on consolidations, closures, and boundaries.
I would also just quickly add too, and there was another closure consideration that was postponed out of last year's study because of the potential impact of reconfiguration and having to make kids switch from 3 different schools in 3 subsequent years. And we would like to actually take up that piece as part of this study as well again. So again, another potential closure that we'd like to analyze within this study area that we weren't able to address in a previous study.
I think it's interesting because this starts to get in Kim and I's neighborhood. And I was just going to speak to, it's interesting because whenever you have boundary study or school consolidations, nobody likes that in their neighborhood, right? I mean, you start to post that and everyone gets a little uppity and a little concerned. Oh my goodness, are you looking at my school, right? So I found it fascinating that we actually all, as a board, received an email from the Granger Council PTA chair begging us to look into this very problem. And I thought, this is a community that's actually coming to us and saying, please come study our area. We need help. We see that DLI, it's really an issue of the non-DLI students not receiving the services that they need, and a huge imbalance because we all know this from last study that, when you get into DLI imbalance issues, kids aren't learning. There's somebody suffering, right? So I just wanted to put that on record. I don't know, Kim, maybe I stepped on your toes, but that they actually emailed the board and said, please come to our area. And I thought, that's the first time I've ever received an email saying, please, we welcome this. We want this study. We need your help. So for that reason, and being my area, I'm going to listen to my area, I would support the recommendation. Sorry, Kim, did I say anything wrong?
Well, I We were just commenting on, was that discussion or a question?
That was discussion, Karen. That was discussion.
I second it.
Just to save that. No, I was going to make the same point that this study would encompass my entire precinct plus some more, right? And the feedback we have heard, like you said, I mean, a lot of it is about the DLI and about wanting us to look at boundaries within this area and things like that. I guess my question is about, like, well, option one, you're already talking about evaluating DLI as well. That option obviously doesn't include the opportunity, or opportunity, I shouldn't phrase it that way, but the potential for school closures, right?
Yeah, you want to address what we would consider an internal study?
Right, and I want to be very clear about this. Some people have referred to a pause, or we don't do any studies this year, at least public. And we didn't like that word pause because there's plenty of work to be done. And that's why we'd call it an internal study. But I think you're right. I mean, a lot of the emphasis has been put on DLI. Like Ben and Don said, there are other issues here. What largely, and I'm going to take a little chance here and speak a little boldly, is we've always considered, unless there's been a closure like we had at Mill Creek, between Mill Creek and Penn last year with the DLI program, that DLI has been a school-based program, and that could be, everything is decided at the school and community council and community level. We believe that's become problematic, and to a point that we're asking that we can study options there. In other words, is there an option to allow the district, the board give the district authorization to make changes short of a closure to help a school determine what's going to happen with the DLI program? Because quite frankly, most DLI parents are largely in our community councils. And our experience has been which DLI parents are going to vote out their own program, even when some of the other traditional classes are not there. So that's kind of a general roundabout way of answering your question, but that's why also we see DLI on almost all of these. We could do that during an internal study, but regardless, really, quite honestly, which study is chosen, it needs to be considered quickly.
Speaking to momentum, I mean, this is important work. At the end of the day, the vision of this committee is that we improve student outcomes by enhancing the limited resources that we have. So we don't want to lose that momentum either.
I have a question. So oh, sorry, Kim, were you not finished?
Sorry, just one follow-up to the, if we were to choose option 3 and DLI is part of the study, is a potential outcome of that, like adding a DLI program to the Cypress network?
I'll speak to that. With respect to that, I think some of those considerations will be part of a future study session, and we would be getting some guidance from the board on that in a future meeting.
We are planning on having the DLI discussion next on our study session in February.
That's a good question. So I have a question. So PAC is recommending option 3 as the ranked vote. Can we take some of option 1, the internal study, and also do that at the same time? Is that a possible? Because I'm wondering if we want to try to do a Davis demographic update or something at the same time. Because
yes.
Oh, that's on option 3. But what about the other? Like option 1 feels like it could be done at the same time as option 3.
A lot of it can.
Okay.
It can. We know that. And that's why you'll see some of these data points on each of these slides. So the two really that, like I said, quite frankly, have to be done. One is a decision, and one way or the other on DLI. And the other is we could do a Davis demographic study in conjunction if we get that quickly. Quite frankly, Don and I did reach out to Davis and ask them a few questions about how quickly they could get things done, and my department's already ramped up trying to collect data. So if we do get a go on that, we can get that going as soon as possible, as early in the study as possible.
So if we approve option 3, just to be clear, are we approving also that Davis demographic?
Well, you see, the final bullet on that recommendation would be to pursue updated data through demographer. So we keep saying Davis demographics. To be clear, we would have to go through an RFP process. We'd have to select a vendor. So we keep saying that because that's just common semantics for us all in terms of who gave us that data previously.
So option 3 would include that, but not the rest of option 1.
We can add whatever pieces you would like to that particular piece. And again, in the spirit of open transparency, we bantied about whether we had the bandwidth to take on Area 5 and the 3100 corridor, and mercifully the PAC felt like Steve and I could not survive that. So that is not part of that recommendation, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to be your decision on what to study. Did you want to add to that, Don?
I think, as I started to look at it, demographic update, need to do that. That's an option 1. I think you're really wondering how much of the DLI we're going to delve into. And I'm going to call these, they're not apples and oranges. There may be 2 types of apples. It might be a Macintosh and a Fuji that we're talking about here. They're running on very, very parallel tracks. And so as we bring DLI forward in some study sessions, the wrestle's going to be how much we think to ourselves, oh, this is a DLI issue when we can do this, this, and this. And then how does that inform decisions that the PAC makes on boundaries, consolidations, et cetera, right? So they're so closely intertwined that they're both apples. They're just different types of apples that are going to happen in the discussion. And I think as Rick and his team bring those items to your study session, you'll start to see, oh, okay, we do need to talk about DLI. Maybe there are guardrails, maybe there are, maybe it's in a box. And so when it's in the box, then it's applied to discussions and decisions on the consolidation boundary side. Does that?
Yeah.
Did that just get muddier? I thought it did. It got muddier in my
okay.
mind. I apologize, but they're very, very close together. They're just not quite the same issue.
Again, the more we have this discussion, the more I go back to our last couple of months with PAC. These are the kinds of things we've brought up amongst ourselves. So.
And do we have a date when those SPED? So I know 5 schools were recommended for our SPED program restructuring. So would we have those before
That we would
any kind of PAC?
We would hope to have that data before we start honing in on a specifics within the study area. Just to remind everybody about the process. This is a big map, right? But at the end of the day, by the time we get to June, we would have honed in on a very few specific things that we would like to study.
Because of the legislation and our advertising requirements, we go big, so we capture everything that we should advertise to, and then we hone in. This is large because it's the unknown impacts that we might encounter. Oh, suddenly the boundary of school X now has to close. Oh, we didn't think about it. Oh, our area wasn't large enough. No, we've thought about it. The area is large enough. It's helping us understand and give us some maneuvering room on boundaries more than anything else.
It is a valid question because you say you hope to have that, but we should know where
I'm looking at Leslie, and she gave me a wink and a nod, so I'm taking that as a contract.
Okay. Because before we close the school, we need to make sure we're not putting the kids there.
Yeah,
so
if I recall Dr. Day's presentation, a lot of it was, hey, we want to do this. Hey, board, we need a budget to do it. And your budgetary discussions and decisions will be formulated in advance, really, of the big fall actions. And we'll have a pretty darn good idea as budget goes through in May. So I think it's a really good set of timing, and it should work.
Okay.
You remember that I point of ordered on the timing of the DLI discussion, because internally we're hoping that conversation happens in February because we want to start having our meetings in March and April. And obviously we need some direction from the board before we can go out and really get to the meat of this with the public and open up this study in the way that we normally do.
Okay, with that, this is an action item.
It sounds like, I mean, I'm assuming that in February, we're going to study DLI. We won't be taking any action or giving any direction. Am I right? I mean, there would be no direction that you can then take back to schools.
I defer to the superintendent.
Good call.
Thank you.
So the board does reserve the right if they wanted to take a definitive action on DLI in February at a study session. In order for this to advance, you wouldn't have to take that action. It would be part of the study and could come back. For context, DLI in our district really was left to individual communities to make a determination whether or not they want them in the school, and that's why we see so many in that corridor, in that area, in close proximity. What we would be suggesting here is we wouldn't want to hold up what would be a necessary school consolidation in lieu of a program, and that's what Don's talking about, parallel. So on some level, given declining enrollment in that area, that necessitates looking at DLI even closer in terms of a timeline. And then it would obligate in some way, if we do consolidate schools, an impact on DLI per board action, where in the past it hasn't been board action that has determined impacts or adoption of DLI. Hopefully that answers the question.
I'll just get at what my concern is. I think that any decisions that we make about DLI should come from a lot of feedback that we've heard from people who are in DLI schools.
Absolutely.
And so that I just want to make sure we don't make it, separately in a silo from that.
Yeah.
And so that's why I was concerned. 2 weeks, we'll talk about this, and I don't feel prepared to send out some sort of decision in 2 weeks.
Correct. I think what we're hoping to understand in 2 weeks is that what the breadth and scope of what we can study as part of the PAC process.
I move that we accept the PAC's recommendation of moving forward with option 3.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah, I wonder if a better motion perhaps would be to combine option 3 and option 1, or some portion of option 1. And there's overlap already, but it's ambiguous still to me where that all falls. And so I'm not quite sure how best to proceed to encapsulate that option 1 into option 3, or the most important portions of option 1.
Which part of option 1 are you wanting to?
Well, first and foremost, the DLI study, the demographic information. Maybe you can scroll up to the bullet points, but I'm not sure
expansion.
Any of them really don't. I would say all of them are relevant to the option 3 study. So if given the option, I would propose a new motion that combines option 1 and option 3.
If that was a question, I think we would consider that a friendly amendment.
Do you feel like, because you mentioned before, we have to take into consideration the capacity of those working on the PAC. And so my only concern with supporting absolutely every bullet point here, plus study 3, is Ben and Steve and Don, they deserve to go see their families at some point at night. and deserve, so to me it's a capacity issue. Can you speak openly and honestly on your guys' ability? I mean, we know you're good at what you do, that we're not questioning your skill set and your desire to be out in the community and gather that information, but at the same time I want to be sensitive that we're not forcing you to go above and beyond what you have capacity to do. Or maybe Rich, you're better to speak to that.
Well, no, I'm happy to. As I look at it, capacity, and we certainly appreciate consideration of staff, but as I'm looking at option 1, evaluate the efficacy and impact of DLI, we're going to rely more on that department to help us navigate that, and not necessarily PAC entirely. New state legislation and the funding that PAC's out, we're going to turn to Todd and say, figure it out. And in other words, we're distributing. It's about distributing the responsibilities on this list. Potential new Davis demographics, we would run an RFP, we would vet that, and that's going to be, in Jared's department, and we're going to come with a recommendation there and a contract to the board. SPED expansion, and we're going to farm that out as appropriate to our special education department to help with that. And so I'm just going through each one of them and identifying, while it is a lift, it is spread out across more departments and more individuals to tease out some of those things. So it doesn't rest just on the shoulders of PAC entirely.
And I appreciate that. And I think what this does is it provides the board an ability to hold the PAC accountable for overseeing execution of each of these. Not necessarily that we expect you to carry them all out as explained by Rich, but it gives us the chance to hold you accountable that we see these through simultaneously, which I think is critical.
Julie?
The only things that I see on there for myself that are not going to happen unless we vote for this or that could decide not to happen, is the DLI study and the demographics study. The rest of these we have to deal with no matter, they're going to happen whether we have a motion or not. So I would be willing to accept a friendly amendment that included those two things. And I also would, can you amend the friendly amendment? I don't think you can, but
A friend of a friend.
I want assurance that the demographic study is going to include secondary schools. I think it's really important. And so part of me wants to make that part of the vote.
So the vote is on option 3, and option 3, just to review, does say many schools along this corridor struggle to maintain effective traditional classes in conjunction with DLI because of their total enrollment. So I feel like it does already include DLI, but if we want to say that specifically, it also does talk about having pursue the updated, so it does talk about maintaining the DLI and pursuing updated data through the demographer. So that is already in option 3. If those are the two things that you're wanting addressed specifically, does that?
That is acceptable to me as long as the demographic also includes secondary. The demographic study.
It doesn't really say
Wait, that
it's
doesn't
only
say it on there.
elementary anyway.
Wait, where did it?
And that would just be part of the RFP, and there were some elements of secondary in the last one with an emphasis on elementary, but certainly I think that shouldn't be a problem to include that in part of the RFP.
I'm sorry, this says option 3, but on what I'm suggesting is this recommendation. Yeah.
Correct.
This has the updated data through the demographer, including secondary schools.
Connie, you had something, did you? Okay.
I was just going to agree that if we did all of number 1, then it would give you the freedom to do whatever needs to be done.
Okay, Kim had a comment, and then Chris, and then we'll circle back.
I feel like at the end of the day, the only real difference between 1 and 3 is the potential to close schools. That's what I'm seeing.
Well, and if we add option 1 in, then we actually have more data to go on for future.
Sure.
For the future years too, so it kind of encompasses that we have a good setup for the next
I think the
round.
PAC understood that, again, a lot, if not most all of option 1 would probably have to be included in any study, really. I think also that to your question, Karen, is that, yeah, to be honest, the PAC is concerned about their physical and emotional bandwidth. Sure. But we also are concerned about the students and understand the urgency of these things. So that's how we came up with our recommendation.
And if I might just pose, one of the items in option 1 is tracking and understanding where SPED programs land. That's a data point that we always consider every single year. So it's not that it's not part of our collective thinking, right? Steve was illustrating that just to say, hey, there's a point that there's a lot of movement. There's going to be a lot of movement whether we do a study or not. It's just a data point that we use as part of study, consensus, and discussion for the good end result.
Is it fair to say that option 1, I know you said that you had multiple opinions.
Yes.
I look at these recommendations and I think of option one as the option, as those who are voting to not do a school boundary consolidation study this year. So I don't think it's meant to be presented that option one doesn't overlap with 2 or 3. But for those who wanted to hit pause,
Fair.
those are the things that are listed to be studied. Separate to your point, Kim, you touched on it already. It's the differences is option 3 is willing to do all of that, but over here to actually look at school boundaries and consolidation. So to me, I think we're getting a little bit in the weeds of trying to blend 1 and 3 as if one's this separate option, and I don't think it was, I think that was.
Fair.
Is that a good synopsis?
I think that's fair. So Madam President, you can tell me if I'm out of order, but would it be appropriate to have Nicole amend the motion since she made it, or excuse me, to have Julie amend the motion since she made it? And I'll put the pressure on Julie to amend it in a way that incorporates option 1 into option 3.
Well, what I would like to do is I would like to amend my motion to say that I'd like to propose that we accept the PAC's recommendation for option 3 with a new bullet point that says pursue a study of the DLI program.
So you don't feel that that encompasses it in the first one?
No, because it just says that it has the most urgent need due to the number of highly impacted schools combined with the many schools along this corridor that are struggling to maintain effective traditional classes in DLI schools. Okay. I don't think that looks at the entire DLI program, and that's what I would like this study to do.
All right, so we have a motion to accept the PAC's recommendation for option number 3 with the addition of a bullet point that says we will study the DLI program as well.
Do we have a second?
We understand.
Right.
Okay. Has it been seconded?
No, second. Is there a second?
I'll second it. Somebody seconded the first motion, but I'll second that one.
Do they have to be?
So you can have the maker of the motion restate their motion without objection.
Okay, so without objection, she's restating the motion then. All right. So no objection, so we will go ahead and vote on the amended motion by Julie.
It's a motion.
A restated motion. Thank you. So the restated motion by Julie that we accept option 3 of the PAC's recommendation with the addition of studying the DLI program. Any further discussion or questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. Your marching orders.
Thank you.
Best of luck to you.
All right, we're going to move on to our first readings for policy. As Doug is at a family event, we've invited Rich to present these to us. All right, we are looking at Article 5C, I gotta make it bigger, 17, student memorials and tributes.
Yeah, thank you, Board President, and we do excuse Doug Larson, who is enjoying some time away with family. Appreciate taking a look at these. These policies have been discussed in our Policy and Law Committee. This first one, student memorials and tributes, is really a pretty sobering policy, but we feel necessary. Anytime we lose a student, our hearts break, and we truly mourn with the family and as a school community. What this policy does is essentially take into consideration what should be considered when a student passes, and then there's requests for memorials of the student passing in the school. And so mental and behavioral health experts have suggested that to memorialize on school grounds the passing of a student actually produces other anxieties and or suicidal ideations depending on the nature of a student's passing with other students because they see perhaps how a school memorializes a passing of a student. And so this policy provides the guardrails around how our district proceeds on such a sensitive topic. Again, recognizing that we mourn with the family, but at the same time, our schools, how do we handle when requests for memorials are given? And the general consensus is among mental health experts is you don't memorialize on school grounds or at school functions or in yearbooks. And the board seeks to address that, or this policy seeks to address that. And that's found in the statement of policy, whether it's memorial events, physical memorials, and some resources for families and the community generally. During our crisis response, our district does provide response materials to help with other students, with our own faculty and staff, our employees, and for families where it may be needed. So with that, any discussion to this first reading?
Any questions? Not discussion yet.
Thank you.
No questions? All right,
I make a motion that we approve Article 5C17. What?
You move.
I move. I do. I move that we approve Article. Is that supposed to be a 5 or a V?
We'll go with 5.
5C17, student memorials and tributes.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve Article 5C17, student memorials and tributes as a first reading. Are there any further discussion or questions? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. I just want you to tell Doug how fast we go. I'm just kidding.
When he's not here.
All right, we will move on to.
We'll leave that to you to go.
Article 9A31, personnel files and records.
Thank you, Madam President. This is, we as an employer maintain various files regarding our employees. This just speaks to the handling of those records and separating, if you will, from an employee's record what medical files need to exist and from their personnel files. This policy just reiterates our practice and review or opportunity review for an employee to review what is in their personal file. And if there is anything that, if you take a look at A3, upon request by appointment, they can, I already stated that, I apologize. They'll be allowed to inspect their files. It's in 5, any employee may petition to remove certain things in their file, subject to state law or other district policies. Any material that's found to be inaccurate, unreliable, or unfounded shall be removed and destroyed. So it allows an opportunity for an employee to review their file. If there's anything of question in there, they can choose to appeal what is in there. And then again, if you take a look at B, it separates medical records from that personnel file.
Great, are there any questions? Okay.
I move that we accept Article 9A31, personnel files and medical records.
As a first reading. As a first reading.
As a first reading.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to accept Article 9A31, personnel files and medical records as a first reading. Are there any further discussion? Any further discussion on this? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. We'll move on to our second readings. We have Article 9A1Y. I had to make it bigger, sorry. Access and accommodations for individuals with disabilities. Turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam President. So there's essentially 3 areas in which we need to address. One is the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And of course, we work through access and accommodations through IDEA in that space as well. What this policy does is brings us in compliance with those statutes and essentially accomplishes our purpose and obligation, if you will, for making sure that individuals with disabilities in our school settings have access to our facilities and our programs.
Just as a reminder, the big part that was added to this was the section about therapy animals and the ability to now have them be in our schools as a big part of that. Yeah. So are there any questions on this?
I move that we approve Article 9A1Y, access and accommodations for individuals with disabilities, for a second reading.
I'll second.
Second and final reading?
And final reading.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second to approve Article 9A1Y, access for accommodations for individuals with disabilities, as a second and final reading. Is there any further discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. We will move on to the last one, which is Article 9A1Z, employee health and safety immunizations and workplace accidents.
Okay. Thank you, Madam President. So this particular policy recognizes that in our schools we have a lot of people. And because we have a lot of people, there's a lot of interaction. And amongst that, there's opportunities to spread illness, sickness, even disease. And so for that reason, this particular policy identifies what the safety immunization requirements are, either between state statute or even CDC recommendations should be afforded to our employees and required for them to demonstrate that they have received those or an exemption to those, whatever it may be. And it also identifies handling of bodily fluids and the appropriate policy around how we take precautions to keep our employees safe, and the expectation within policy in how we address that exposure.
Question?
Go ahead.
I noticed the changes are still tracked in this version that's in the agenda that I'm looking at, but
yes.
just for clarification, there were no changes between the first reading and today, correct?
That is correct.
I believe that they had not taken out the, because you had asked, maybe not. I don't know. Never mind.
There was some discussion.
I thought there was one thing that that you had said that needed to be changed between last time.
I don't recall, but the changes I'm looking at are all the changes from the original discussion.
Per that meeting, as I recall, we were going to go as staff and take a look at what some of those CDC recommendations are, particularly as it related to COVID-19. And so we have gone and taken a look at that, and that is actually still a recommendation by the CDC to receive that vaccine. So that's why it's left in there.
Yeah, and we discussed that last time, but I think there's a bunch of changes tracked. To me, they're all the ones that we made in law and policy. In the other second reading, there were no changes tracked. So I'm just confirming the changes were left there, I guess, accidentally, or removed from the other one accidentally. There's been nothing new that's changed since the first reading.
That's correct. But to track it, yes, from first to second, yeah, that's represented in your backup.
Okay, there's no other questions? I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we accept as a second and final reading Article 9A1Z, employee health and safety immunizations and workplace accidents.
All right, we have a motion and a second to accept Article 9A1Z, employee health and safety immunization and workplace accidents, as a second and final reading. Is there any further discussion on this? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you.
Do you want to stay there for your report, or do you want to come back up here?
Whatever, this works fine for me.
It's your turn. So whatever you want to do.
All right. How about I stay down here, and Chief of Staff, I'll keep Ben company. Thank you, Board President, and thank you, Board. As was mentioned in the good news minutes, there's a lot of good things going on in our district, and there's some things that are going on within the legislature, and it's a fast 45 days. Appreciate being able to engage with our legislators on a number of different things. We're, of course, tracking the certain bills and its impact on the board. Appreciate JLC meeting here on Fridays. That's the Joint Legislative Committee for the audience, who meet and discuss the bills at length and take positions on that, which then those positions are communicated to various legislators on the Hill. With that, we still have schools to operate, and so that is, as a superintendent, my first and foremost priority is the work that occurs in our schools, while recognizing also that what occurs during the legislative session impacts the day-to-day activities in our schools. And so appreciate your support in being able to engage on both of those fronts. I will say early literacy continues to be a high priority for our district, and among other areas of priority when it pertains to student proficiency in academics. And so as you may recall, particularly in elementary, that K-3 space, that early literacy space, we do what's called benchmark testing. And that is ran through the state in terms of the expectation in state code. But we offer a beginning of the year assessment, a middle of the year assessment, and an end of year assessment. And those benchmarks determine what progress our students are making. And so as we think about this middle of the year, all schools started with a continual improvement plan that had a priority, essentially, nearly every elementary school does, around early literacy. And what these benchmark assessments allow us to do is to determine whether or not the action steps we're taking is having the desired impact on student outcomes that we need to see. And so when you get to the middle of the year, it's an opportunity to ask ourselves, are there any mid-year course corrections that we need to take? Are our action steps, the things that we're doing in our classes, in our teaching, in our interventions, are they having the desired impact? And if not, what refinements do we need to make so that we can see more growth from middle of the year to end of year? And so there are a few, if you want to think of it as a recipe, systems that ought to be in place to maximize the opportunity for those outcomes. And so as we've been looking at our middle of year data, we had some areas that we were certainly celebrating with some schools that are making some success, and there's some areas of concern. And so last week, we invited all of our elementary principals and their literacy coaches to essentially engage in this discussion, to take a look at their individual data and to reinforce what those best practices are, not only in terms of mid-year course corrections, but also what does it look like moving forward as they plan for next year. And so for schools that see the greatest amount of literacy, particularly early literacy proficiency gains, have a few fundamental things in common. And we reviewed in the space of about 3 hours and giving them opportunity to engage around their own data, what those components are. And first and foremost is a dedicated literacy block. A time where teachers are engaging in literacy instruction at grade level with their students. And the recommendation there is about 120 minutes throughout the day, engaging in literacy instruction. Now, of course, that's not just in English, but literacy instruction can occur in other content areas as well. But following that is an opportunity to engage in interventions. And what are those high quality interventions, and how do we carve out time during the day if a student is still in that red and yellow, right? You have red, yellow, green, and blue. Red and yellow is well below or well below, and green and blue are above, as you can imagine, or they're at grade level or approaching grade level. And so engaging with the principals on that, we identified what does a literacy block look like being taught at grade level, what are the intervention strategies, and how is that built into a master schedule. In addition to the benchmarks, we have what's called progress monitoring, meaning we don't have to wait. If we give that assessment in September, that first one, we don't have to wait till January to see how well our students are progressing. And we can track along a pathway of progress whether or not they're making those progresses as we do what's called progress monitoring. The schools that see the highest increases in literacy rates of students are doing progress monitoring to fidelity, which means at rate. If I'm a student that's very well below where I'm supposed to be at this time, I ought to be progress monitored more frequently than students that are not. And so we're able to show which schools, which grade levels, which teachers are progress monitoring at rate. Now, progress monitoring at rate is only as good as the intervention that follows for having engaged in the progress monitoring. And so as we think about moving forward and identifying this, we had a real good debrief of that. We talk about school-wide specific goals, grade level specific goals, teacher specific goals, and that's all based on where the students are in front of them. And then the second, or the last component I'll say is this, is in order to effectively lead for the type of impact, student impact that we desire to see, the principal also has to be an instructional leader in that role. Implementing what does monitoring of implementation look like around early literacy, and for that reason having a deep understanding of themselves, of those early literacy practices. So as we continue to focus on this effort, and I apologize for being long-winded here a little bit, but enough context for the board to understand how we are prioritizing early literacy in this space, how we're using data, how we're setting the systems up in our schools, and how we are executing on increasing the literacy rate in our district. And unless there are any questions, Madam President, that concludes my superintendent report.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go ahead and go on to board reports. We'll start with you, Clark.
I'll just thank Dr. Nye for being in our schools so often. It's noticed by our patrons and by our teachers and our administrators, and it makes a significant impact on our school district. So I know it's a significant sacrifice for you and your family for the amount of time that you spend in the evenings at schools, in addition to the time that you spent all day at other schools. So I just want to express appreciation on behalf of many who have reached out to me to offer those things.
I echo that too, but I'm just going to be specific as to the legislature right now going on and how many hours collectively Rich, Ben, and Todd spend up on the Hill advocating for us. And so, you know, thank you for the extra time, and also for the relationships that you build with our legislators. That's key, because they know who you are, they respect you, and they're going to listen to what you have to say. And I do think it brings back a huge benefit, not only for public ed across the state, but specifically to Granite. So we're grateful to have such strong, respected voices advocating for us on the Hill. So thank you for that. On a less serious note, I was actually an unknown timekeeper for our Good News Minute, and everybody was under a minute except for 2. See me after if you want to know if you're one of them.
Julie, it's you too.
It was actually Chris and Julie, but that's okay.
I would like to correct that. Actually, Clark was over. He was a minute and a half.
Well, it averaged a minute because we were 11 minutes total. So if you want to get specific, I can give you your number after.
Hey, if we're going to average our times, then we should average them over a broader spectrum. So my average is like 3.8 seconds.
I literally thought I had 2 minutes. Do I only have 1?
It's called Good News Minute, not Good News 2 minutes.
So Julie was 3, and so was Chris.
The lunch workers are amazing, though.
And CTE program, you can't, in 1 minute, CTE, GTI,
Okay.
sorry.
Can I call the question?
Chris.
That was my board report, CTE, there you go.
Connie, do you have anything?
I just started, and I wrote down the legislature because I am not involved very much with it, and I just appreciate so very much you three that are involved, and the reports we get from Julie, and it's just, I'm so proud to be part of Granite because of that. And then just the other thing, I'm grateful for the sports. I went to see a swim meet, and one little girl from our high schools went and swam every event, came in last every single time, and was disqualified in one of them. And I just think, what an opportunity for her to come out and be willing to know that she's not going to win, but willing to put forth the effort. So I just am grateful for the sports.
Thanks, Connie. Kim?
I wanted to report on a district community council that was held here January 16th. Todd gave an electrifying presentation on educational funding. I did not hear a single person snore, so it was good. Just kidding. Most people, I feel like honestly, it's a difficult topic to understand. You have to hear it a few times, at least that's been my experience. So I don't know how much was absorbed, but I think it was appreciated either way. And then Dr. Nye also talked about how to engage with the legislature, and he included
You were not electrifying.
No, but he included a masterful animated video about how laws are made, and it made me wish that no bill would ever have to die as just a bill. Just kidding, because there are plenty of bad bills that deserve an early death, but anyway, it was a great video. But he explained how to track bills, he showed everyone how to create a tracker, and how to find out who's sponsoring legislation, and how to just be engaged. And I really did think the audience there that night was very appreciative of that information. I kind of felt like they felt a little inspired to do something, right, and to start to track legislation, so I thought that was really good. So that's my report.
I'll just report as the USBA representative for a second. Thursday, we have USBA Day on the Hill, and right before I walked out the door for this meeting, I sent you guys all like a page that has all what's going on, ideas of things that are going to be relevant to Granite that we might want to talk about with our legislators. So look that over, and I'm really excited to see you all there. Also, much gratitude to our triple threat. So appreciative of these guys, and huge influence. I'm really always impressed, and like I feel cool for sitting by them at JLC. I'm like, yeah, I'm with them. I also wanted to say that pretty soon here, JLC is going to be voting on whether or not we will support the earmark change in the Constitution that they've been discussing, which we can talk about more later. But it's something that's a really big thing. And so when I vote for it, it's something I'd like to vote on knowing that I have some sort of direction and that we're doing this as a group and that not just Julie's going in and voting on what she thinks. So I'll be having conversations with you, but I'm trying to figure out how to make sure I have them with also Todd or Dr. Nye in the room, so that because their knowledge is so much more vast than mine, and I think they answer your questions better. So just be looking for that. I'll be needing to vote on that in the next few weeks. So we'll be having that discussion. Anyway, thanks, guys.
Thanks. Just real quick, I just want to echo thank you to our fantastic three and your work with the legislature. And I do want to say thanks to Julie. I think she's done a lot of work with, on USB or with USB on USBA with and researching the bills and really being there. I got to come last Friday, and Clark was here for Julie, and then Clark had to run to a meeting, so he handed me the card, and then Connie came halfway through that, and I handed it to her when I left for school. So it was kind of fun.
And then I came. Good.
And then you came, so it was fun. No, but I really do appreciate that, and all the work that everybody puts in on that. I do want to also recognize it is School Counselors Week this week. And so special appreciation to our school counselors. This is a horrible, I know what my school counselors are going through right now because it's registration time for next year. So any shout out, any of whoever's left online, please go say thank you to your school counselors because they're having a rough week right now. So, but thank you for all that they do. They do an amazing job, and it's not just registration and it's not just schedules, it's helping our kiddos in the schools, and their capacity and what they do with what they do in our schools is amazing. So I just want to recognize that. And with that, I think we're done.
Motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
I caught myself.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to